Kruger here, and you're listening to Mike the Birdman and the rest of the crew this week in Geek.net.
Hey everyone, it's Cassandra Peterson, aka Elvira, and I'm back for In Search of Darkness Part 3.
My name is Corey Taylor. I am an avid horror fan. We're about to fuck your whole day up.
And now, our feature presentation.
Hey guys, what's going on? You are listening to ThisWeekInGeek.net. I'm your host, Mike the Birdman. And well, guys, it is that time of year. We are celebrating Halloween here on TWIG. And I had something interesting fall into my goodie bag this spooky season. And I got offered an interview with a longtime TWIG friend. And I'm always glad when he comes on the show. I'm talking with the director of the In Search of Darkness documentary. If you've seen part 1, you've hopefully seen part 2. Did you know there's a part 3 coming? Holy shit, because I'm looking forward to this. So without any further ado, let's talk with director David Weiner, because you know what? You've only got a few more days to pre-order this on 80shorrordoc.com on Halloween. That's it. No more, guys. Time's running out. But let's talk about why you should and the journey to get to this epic conclusion of a 3-part trilogy. David, welcome back to the show, man.
Hey, Mike, so happy to be back. And yeah, I got to go quote Halloween 3 right off the bat. The clock is ticking. It's almost time, boys and girls. You got to go to 80shorrordoc.com. Otherwise, your head's going to melt. Don't wear the pumpkin mask, the witch mask, and the skull mask. Avoid those at all costs.
So yes, as the song says, it's Silver Shamrock time. So David, you've been working on these movies since I first met you all those years ago. You've met all these 80s horror icons, from directors, producers, special effects, talent, sound editors, effects people. You've met so many people. What has the journey been like to do the third one? Because you'd think at the end of the second one, you've seen everything, but evidently I'm wrong.
Well, there's so much in this decade of 80s horror. So for those not in the know, In Search of Darkness, Part 1, Part 2, and now Part 3 is a trilogy that explores the 80s, the cinema of the 80s, specifically genre cinema, specifically 80s horror, the stuff that we know and love. And there was an absolute explosion of material. Hundreds and hundreds of movies were made, especially with VHS and video rentals and cable. So many amazing films were just straight to shelves. They might not have even been in your theater, in your local theater. But there was just so much material that it takes movie and movie and movie and movie, long-form documentary after long-form documentary to tackle it all. And there's no way that we can. But now that we're in our third final installment of this, it's really something where we wanted to really go to a lot of the straight to video, a lot of the shot on video, a lot of the short theatrical window material, and a lot more international titles that we just haven't gotten to yet, that really demonstrates the eclectic nature of the explosion of imagination of that time.
I mean, one of the things that I noticed immediately during some of the promo trailers, these are 2 of my favorite 80s horror movies, and I really wish I could remember where I found them. I want to say I found them during there used to be a DVD rent through mail service called zip.ca. For those of you that know what the hell I'm talking about, there was a movie called Spookies.
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
And I love this movie because it's so weird and stupid. I don't think it had a theatrical window.
No.
And you also had The Video Dead, which I was convinced for 10 years that I imagined it. And that's right on your poster.
Oh yeah, The Video Dead is really great. For those not in the know, The Video Dead is a movie that is about video, basically zombies that come out of your television from basically they cross the realm, sort of Ring style, into your house through the television. And but what's unique about these zombies is they all have quirky personalities. They all kind of want to relive the joys of living while they're undead, and it's definitely quirky. And one of the cool things about it is that it stars Michael St. Michaels, with a great name. I'm sure, Mike, you would appreciate that.
Oh yeah,
Michael St. Michaels. And he is best known these days for playing the Greasy Strangler, another great weird cult classic. But he started that when he was younger, and he plays two parts. He plays a human, and then he played a zombie as well, but not the zombie from the human that died. Spoiler alert.
I mean, it's so cool just to see some of these direct to video movies finally getting their due and having experts from like Fangoria, people like Joe Bob Briggs, James Rolfe from Cinemasker.com to kind of weigh in on all these things. And then even people like Corey Taylor from like kind of Slipknot. I mean, and even during the promo trailer that's been circulating for a little while, there are some shots in there from some movies I recognize from, I want to say, India and Japan. Tell me a little bit about some of the foreign movies you were able to find.
Yeah, also I want to say real quick, because you mentioned Corey Taylor. Corey Taylor just announced that he's the co-owner now of Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine, which I used to be editor. I used to be editor of. And so if anything, that really just cements his horror monster kid bona fides right there. So that's just a cool little aside. That being said, when we did In Search of Darkness Part 1, there was so much a mountain of material to tackle. And so I somewhat reluctantly kept everything North American in terms of the heavy hitters that we showed and talked about. Plus some eclectic titles. But when we got to part 2, I really wanted to sort of go much more international. We focused in on Italian horror. We even talked to Shinya Tsukamoto in Japan, who did Tetsuo, the Iron Man. I really wanted to sort of expand. And I'm doing that much more this time around. We're talking about Asian horror, but we're also talking about more European horror, more Spanish and Mexican horror. There's a great director. His name is Ruben Galindo Jr., and he did a trio of these amazing horror films in the late 80s that one is called Cemetery of Terror, one's called Dope Panic. It's really good stuff. It's really fun. And he has an absolutely amazing sense of humor about his work, and was so happy to talk to us. We went to Mexico City to talk to him. So, Canadian horror, there's plenty of Canadian horror that we're focusing in on Canucksploitation.
Ooh.
And how Canucksploitation is basically a fancy, fun word for the Canadian government helped filmmakers like, David Cronenberg and others to with tax incentives. As long as they were hiring a certain percentage of Canadian crew and actors, they could get these great tax breaks. And that really inspired a lot of horror in the late 70s and then through the 80s. And so a lot of the films that we love in 80s horror, we might not realize is Canadian, from everything from My Bloody Valentine to Prom Night to The Gate to Rock and Roll Nightmare and Black Roses, which are great heavy metal horror titles. It's really important because this was a world event. Everyone was jumping on the horror bandwagon, and everyone needs to be recognized. And we do that even more this time around.
Now, speaking of Canadian movies, there were a couple shots in there that I did recognize. I saw The Brain was referenced in there, and I saw that for the first time this summer. And I remember seeing that movie as a child it was either on Cinemax or HBO at like 2:00 in the morning. Scared the ever-living shit out of me. And another movie I remember, I know it's Canadian, and the only reason I know this is because I had a roommate in college who talked about this movie. You have a person in a really messed up mask attacking somebody with a hockey skate on like a skating rink. Yes, curtains.
On a pond. Yep.
Yeah. And I'm like, I know this movie. And if you can believe this, David, I have a personal connection to Black Roses.
Oh, do tell.
So first year of film school, when I'm at Niagara College, my film professor was a person named David Niven. And he's
Not to
this,
be confused with the David Niven.
not to be confused with the David Niven, but Niven was this, he's an odd fellow, but a very charming fellow. And we're going into his office one day, me, my roommate, and my best friend, and we're all talking, and he's telling us about his first jobs in the movies. I think he was an assistant director on Follow That Bird, which is the Sesame Street movie.
Of course, yes.
But then he tells us one of his first gigs was working on a horror movie called Black Roses. And me and my roommate, my best friend, we went to the depths of eBay bootleg hell to find the best copy of Black Roses we could possibly find. I think we paid like $70. And for his birthday, we gave him that copy.
Oh, nice.
And then we bought a copy for ourselves. We're like, dude, I know you're our professor, but could you like sign this? And
that's awesome.
yeah, so it was kind of neat to like see that, and just looking at the weird practical effects of the 1980s, because that's something that a lot of horror fans like myself really appreciate, because the 80s was, in my opinion, the height and the evolution of how the practical effects come. I mean, we all had people like Tom Savini and Greg Nicotero, but also people who would work on stuff like The Howling and on American Werewolf in London, and all those pioneering special effects. But you look at a movie like Black Roses, and like, it's goofy and stupid, but in a really, really, really fun way.
Sort of the opposite end of the spectrum. Just because the effects were at their zenith doesn't mean everyone had the budget to do it. And Black Roses is a perfect example of that. You're absolutely right.
Exactly. Yeah, like it's like so much fun. And I'm really glad that you decided to look around the world to see what else is out there, because everybody's heard of Jason, Freddy, Chucky, etc. And when you were looking to talk to some people for the interviews on this, you got people like Thaw Matthews. People may recognize him as Tommy Jarvis from Friday the 13th Part 6. More recognizably, probably from Return of the Living Dead Parts 1 and 2. Yeah. Who were some of the other people that you got a hold of that were on your bucket list to finish out this epic trilogy?
Well, because a lot of these titles really are sort of from the dusty shelves of the video store horror section that, you know, we're sitting there arguably longer waiting for the hardcore fans to rent them. That's the people that we went to, the people who were in front of the camera and behind the camera. So you talk about Black Roses. We got Frank Dietz, who's the star of Black Roses. And he got to talk all about how working with John Fasano, the director, who did Rock and Roll Nightmare, Zombie Nightmare, Black Roses. They worked on an Asian horror movie called The Jitters together. And so it was very cool to get his perspective, because, you know, he makes no bones about that they were working on a low budget and they did what they could with what they had. But that's part of the story that makes it really, really, really fun. There were, if they, you know, like we talked to Ruben Galindo Jr., we talked to Frank Dietz. We went all the way to Japan. I keep on going back to Japan. Screaming Mad George, talk about amazing effects artist. He's the guy who turned that one character, that girl, into a cockroach in Nightmare on Elm Street 4. And
I thought that was that person.
And if you've seen the Society, or if you haven't seen the Society, I have one thing to say to you: The Shunting, and he's the madman behind that. And he worked on Poltergeist 2 and Big Trouble in Little China, Bride of Reanimator. It's so cool to get his perspective. I don't want to reveal too many of the names, but I will say there are certain names that we just couldn't get around to in Part 1 and Part 2 for whatever reason, in terms of budget or scheduling or time. And availability, but there are certain people we just had to have. I mean, we had to have Charlie Band, you know, the producer of Puppet Master and Reanimator, and, you know, the man behind Full Moon Entertainment and Empire Pictures and all these Stuart Gordon classics. It's so cool to finally be able to sit down with him. And side note, he was the first person I ever worked for when I worked in Hollywood in the early 90s. So I got to sort of revisit him and say, hey, Charlie, you know, he didn't realize until I jogged his memory who I was, because he thought I'm the guy interviewing him for In Search of Darkness 3. And I'm like, yeah, I worked with you on a bunch of things. And he's like, uh-oh. But It wasn't a hit job. We had so much fun talking about his exploits in indie film, just making mint overnight, making a pile of money and then losing it the next day, buying a castle and opening up a studio in Italy, and then next thing you know, things aren't working out, and he's back in the States. He's had quite the adventure, and it's real fun talking to people like that.
Yeah, actually, once upon a summer when I was out of PR school, I worked for Charlie.
Oh, you
Actually,
did? Oh,
yeah,
so you're in the know. Okay.
yeah, and it's amazing how you think about people from the 80s, like I said, like you're talking about the Empire Picture and the Full Moon era. Those were the days when direct to video could do some astounding things, and it didn't have to have a gigantic budget. Like the first Puppet Master wasn't a very expensive movie, but it spawned this gigantic media franchise that is still going today.
Yeah, there's at least, I think, 842 titles in the Puppet Master franchise. I might be
Well,
off by a couple numbers.
and it's even sparking like new types of merchandise. Like I remember when I was in college, I showed one of my girlfriends at the time the Puppet Master series, and I bought her a replica of Blade,
Ah,
which was really, really, really cool. So it's amazing how much 80s horror has kind of carried through my life and the lives of so many of my friends around me. And I'm really thankful, David, that you have had the opportunity to be behind the camera, talking with all these people, exposing me to new things, and with services like Shudder and Screambox, Netflix, Amazon Prime, and other services are continually adding new movies. Hell, even a place like Tubi, for example, which is a free.
Tubi, all hail Tubi. If you haven't found Tubi, there's so
Yeah,
many amazing titles from that era, and it's great.
like I remember, and this is something we don't have it in Canada because I guess it's region locked, but I just found out you can get the entirety of Freddy's Nightmares on Tubi.
Oh, really? Oh, and
Yeah,
it's too bad that it's kind of locked, border locked, I guess. In
yeah.
the dream realm. Yeah, it's funny. A lot of these movies, especially in Search of Darkness Part 3 that we're covering, are kind of what some, in terms of distributors, people think it's kind of bottom of the barrel material. But if you're true fans like us that just really just revel in all this good, bad, and ugly just because it's fun, you could find so much of it on Tubi. And I say all hail Tubi because I actually used it as a tool. There were a lot of times where I wanted to make a reference to something or find a particular shot. And rather than having to go to my DVD or my library, I literally could just log into not even log in. I could go on Tubi, find a movie that it was likely I was covering in my film, and I could immediately was that person killed by a hatchet, a saw, a sack over the head, or eaten by a plant? I can't remember. Let's take a look. And I could find it, and it was instant gratification. So I literally used it as a tool for a lot of the shot references that we use in Search of Darkness.
Now, in Search of Darkness 3, there was a name that I caught. I can't remember the individual, but I remember who they are from. And I want to talk about the idea of film preservation because of services like Tubi, uh, DVD houses and Blu-ray houses like Vinegar Syndrome are
Oh yeah,
doing
yeah.
some astounding work bringing back all these old horror movies that we never had access to, or stuff that's been long out of print for so long. How helpful were places like Vinegar Syndrome to you?
Oh yeah, well, Vinegar Syndrome. You got David Gregory. David Gregory is Severin. So David Gregory is the co-founder of Severin Pictures. Brad Henderson is a producer at Vinegar Syndrome. They are experts through and through on this very specific topic of the sort of straight to video, the shot on video stuff, and they were an absolute resource in terms of really getting the insight on these films, and even with. David Gregory talks about Eyes of Fire. I'll spoil something. We cover Eyes of Fire in Search of Darkness Part 3. And Eyes of Fire is an 80s film that was out of print, impossible to find. And David Gregory was putting together a box set on folk horror. And so he tracked down the director who was on the East Coast and hadn't been making movies for decades, and had the print of this film, which had never made its way beyond VHS, I believe. And he basically scanned it and restored it and upgraded it, and put not only the theatrical release but a director's cut on there as well. And it's people like at Severin, at Vinegar Syndrome, at even Scream Factory, Criterion. It's film preservation, and these movies will disappear if they don't cross the digital divide, which keeps on expanding. So if something came out theatrically and then, like Blood Beach, they only made it to VHS and then stopped. When you're on DVD, when you're on Blu-ray, when you're on 4K, when you're on 8K, when you're on hologram sitting next to you, a lot of these things, the rights aren't passed along where people will spend the money because they don't think there's going to be a return on the investment just to upgrade it. So they're disappearing left and right. And if anything, In Search of Darkness the whole series really is a time capsule of the people who worked on these films, but it's also a curation list for films that may not quite make it down the road in terms of their availability.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing that really attracted me to the film series. I mean, when we first started speaking years ago, David, I was a fan of 80s horror, maybe a little bit more advanced than, your average neophyte, but I became more and more entrenched in it the more I watched these movies. Like, I guaranteed I'll rewatch In Search of Darkness 1 and 2 once or twice a year just to see, can I track this movie down either legally or on the high seas, you might say, just because they're so hard to find. And I'm glad companies like Vinegar Syndrome and Severin and Scream Factory are doing the work to bring these movies out. And with filmmakers like yourself highlighting it, it's a real treat, even just to see a forgotten trailer or a shot of a quick kill, or to hear from a star who maybe hasn't been heard from in so long. I mean, it's a real treat. It's like going to a Fangoria convention in your home. And that's something that can't really be replicated, because it's different. Because when you go to a horror convention, yeah, sure, you may pay your $30-$40 to go meet Kane Hodder, but when you sit down with a documentary that's 5+ hours, you're sitting in the ultimate panel room with all these people giving all their experience and all their stories. And I know with you guys who are In Search of Darkness, you guys are always doing something special. Like, there's special chats, there's stuff going on. You can have your name in the credits and stuff like that. So as we wrap things up, time is running out. Like, we're talking Halloween, man. We are right down to the wire. So if people wanted to get involved in Search of Darkness Part 3, the finale, my God, I wish you'd do more. How do they get involved?
And by the way, that's a great analogy. It really is like the ultimate seat at a convention. This is an absolute celebration of all these films, and that's what's so great is all these interviews talk about not only their own films and experiences, but just their love for the genre and how they've been inspired. Time is running out. And so you got to jump on this. We're a small company, and so we make and manufacture this ourselves. So the reason why the deadline is midnight Halloween it's such a limited time is because what we want to do is we get everyone who purchases this right before that deadline, we will put their name and your name in the credits. And it could be your name, it could be your podcast, it could be a loved one, someone special to you. But this becomes a real keepsake that with your help, we get over the line to shepherd this into production and distribution. When I say production, I mean manufacturing, because the film is done. But what we're also doing, and so you go to 80shorrordoc.com to get In Search of Darkness 3, but you can also get the trilogy. If you missed part 1 or part 2, or you want to just get the whole trilogy as a box set with a slipcase, you could do that as well. Plus there's all cool swag like amazing posters, digital download of the movie, digital download of the soundtrack. We're doing a cool video video style membership card where we have all sorts of deals with horror merch and so on. But one last thing, which is really cool that I want to tell you and everybody, is that we're doing a thing that I wanted to give back to the fans and the backers in the community who've done so much for us, especially choosing a lot of the content for this particular film. So what I would love everybody to do, and I'll tell you how to do it in a minute, but everyone, I would love for you to record a video testimonial talking about what 80s horror means to you, why it's so important to you, a filmmaker, just the era itself. Talk about that stuff and put it on video and then send it to us, and do that by Halloween night. And we can't do every single one, but I'm going to do as many as possible because those credits are long. And I'm going to line the credits top to bottom with as many heartfelt testimonials about why we all love 80s horror at the end of In Search of Darkness Part 3. So if you go to our socials, which are 80s Horror Doc on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, you know how there's a Linktree link at the top. Just click on that. That tells you exactly what you need to do. But I would love to see everybody just sharing their heartfelt thoughts about why this genre is so important to all of us.
I know I will be submitting something for sure. I'm looking forward to it. David, I have enjoyed talking with you about all these projects for so long. So I'm looking forward to speaking with you again in the future about whatever projects you've got coming up. So again, guys, if you want to check this out, it is 80shorrordoc.com. All the links are available in the show notes. You can follow them on Twitter, Instagram. Get these video testimonials in. Who knows? Maybe I'll make it into the credits. You guys should back this project. I'm going to try and figure out a way to do this myself, but we will see what we can do. So anyway, guys, coming up on the show later on this week, me and Alex are going to be talking about the Apocalypse trilogy by John Carpenter. That's The Thing. That's going to be Prince of Darkness, and finally In the Mouth of Madness. We'll be talking about that for our Halloween special, but don't forget to check out our special coverage where we talked with James Rolfe's Cinemassacre. We spoke with him talking about the movies of Stephen King. So anyway, guys, until next time, I have been one of your horror hosts this Halloween season. I've been Mike the Birdman, saying be excellent to each other. We'll catch you guys again next time right here on ThisWeekInGeek.net.
Holy fuck, what was that?
There's a lot of love and craft that I really appreciate.
I thought I could create magic.
It was diabolical.
It's so grimy and slimy.
It's unbearable to watch.
I might have been a bit too much for a mainstream audience.
I got good news and bad news, girls. The good news is your dates are here.
What's the bad news?
They're dead.
At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought.
Thanks for listening to this episode of This Week in Geek. Hungry for more? Check out our website at ThisWeekInGeek.net. You can subscribe to the podcast, browse our Twitter and Instagram, and leave your thoughts on today's topics. If you'd like to give us some feedback, send us an email at feedback@ThisWeekInGeek.net. Tune in next time, and remember,
lower your shields and surrender your listenership.
We would be honored if you would join us.
Thank you for your cooperation. Good night.